Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Emerging market stocks power to a record as investors rotate out of US assets. The yen weakens after the Bank of Japan holds rates steady, with Governor Ueda set to speak this hour. Pressure for progress. US, Ukraine and Russia meet in the UAE today in a renewed push to end Putin's war, a day after President Zelensky lambasts European inaction. Plus, back on track. The EU moves to revive ratification of its trade agreement with the US after tensions thaw over Greenland. A very good morning. Happy Friday. You have made it, and would you believe it, given all of the geopolitical news this week, dominating Davos. Yesterday, we saw Wall Street higher, and the futures picture points to even higher moves today, thanks to that strong US economic data and that rally on big tech yesterday. The weaker dollar, though, spurring gold. We are looking towards that $5,000 a troy ounce level. We're up 0.5% this morning, and a firm eye we keep on the yen as well. As I say, the Bank of Japan holding rates steady. Only one dissenter for a hike this time, but they've raised the inflation forecast. The yen weaker off the back at 158 per dollar. In terms of the risk events on the docket for today, we keep an eye on that press conference for Governor Ueda of the BOJ at 6:30 a.m. roughly London time. Any signals that the next hike is going to come sooner than the market is pricing, or any signals that the Bank of Japan could get involved with the bond market after the rout we saw this week? We should be listening closely. But also today we're going to be looking out for European PMIs this morning, and at 2:45 p.m. London time, US PMIs as well. Just breaking across the terminal, we have fourth quarter earnings from the Swedish telecoms maker Ericsson. It is a beat for Ericsson, reporting fourth quarter net sales of 69.29 billion Swedish krona. The estimate was for 66.73 billion. Ericsson to propose a share buyback programme of 15 billion Swedish kronor. And we're going to be speaking to the Ericsson CEO later this hour at 6:45 a.m. London time. So we'll get into all of those results and the look ahead. Plenty on the docket for today. Let's set you up for the day ahead. We begin with geopolitics. Officials from the US, Ukraine and Russia will meet in the UAE today as political focus returns to ending the war. Speaking in Davos, the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky criticised Europe for its apparent lack of willingness to stop Vladimir Putin.
No security guarantees work without the US. But what about the ceasefire itself? Who can help make it happen? Europe loves to discuss the future, but avoids taking action today, action that defines what kind of future we will have.
Now, the EU Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas says that Moscow has yet to take any real steps to end the war.
We have seen concessions from Ukrainian side. What we haven't seen is Russia to make any moves or showing any signs of wanting peace. The opposite. They have increased their attacks against the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. So we really need to put the focus where it should be.
Bloomberg Chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook joins us now from Brussels. Ollie, it's been a busy 24 hours where you are. It's going to be another busy 24 hours for Ukraine. Just bring us up to speed on what's been happening.
Yeah, Lizzie, after we took a sort of long detour through the scenic route to Greenland, the geopolitical focus is back squarely on Ukraine for the European leaders. Obviously, for Zelensky, it's always been there, and hopefully now for the United States as well, trying to bring together those parties to try to get these sort of what everyone is hoping is the last mile of the war over the line, to have these discussions to try to get a peace agreement. So in the last 24 hours, we have Zelensky who met with Donald Trump in Davos, saying that the conversation went well, that we also have a much clearer idea Russia now that there are these security guarantees from the United States that are sort of there for Ukraine in the event of a peace agreement. The problem now is getting to that ceasefire, getting to that peace agreement, and that is where Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff come in, who are in Moscow. They've spent the last sort of few hours there. They spent 4 hours with Vladimir Putin last night in those discussions, and we understand that they're going to meet again today. We understand that the main issue here, and we did hear from the Russians on this, is this question of territory, and that this is an issue that is still unresolved. We understand that this is the main issue that is still the main hurdle to getting a peace agreement. What we will get next is hopefully trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi that would begin today, that would go into tomorrow. It is not clear whether it would be just the U.S. delegation meeting with the Russian delegation and then the U.S. meeting with the Ukrainians in parallel, or if they're actually going to manage to all get in the room together, which would be a significant step forward. But that's where we stand. And this is, again, Donald Trump trying to renew that effort to bring Ukraine back into focus, trying to get that sort of peace agreement over the line. We still have that very complicated issue, though, Lizzie. And that's what we heard from Zelensky over the weekend or over the last couple 24 hours, talking in Davos, talking about Europeans, trying to capitalize on the momentum that we got from the sort of crisis in Greenland, that unity within Europe, that the Europeans need to step up. They need to maximize the pressure on Russia in order to get this deal over the line.
OK, Ollie, but look, we've had the split over Greenland, the threat of further tariffs. It seems now, though, that EU leaders are focusing on their trade deal with the US.
Yeah, so I think that the kind of main concrete outcome of the last sort of week that we've seen is going to be that now likely this deal will now be passed. It will go back to European Parliament. You'll remember earlier in the week it was suspended after the tariff threat. But this is the big trade agreement between the EU and the United States that was agreed upon last year that is now supposed to be coming into law. So that is likely back on focus, and that'll likely be voted again. But I think, Lizzie, in the sort of week that we've had here, we went sort of a round trip from crisis and back to think about kind of what European leaders who were here in Brussels last night discussing, what is it that they have learned? The first thing that they have learned, and I think that this is the sort of lesson that's been being taught all year, but really was solidified this week, is that the United States is really willing to weaponize anything and that they're really extremely at risk. And if they want to sort of have any sort of say at the table, the second lesson is you need to be a little bit more assertive, that maybe the Macron route of things is the right way to go. But in order to be assertive, there is the third lesson. It is one about European unity. And we should not sort of undersell the difficulty of the sort of domestic politics within Europe. They are unified at the moment at the leader level. We've even had their far-right parties coming into the center saying, listen, this Greenland thing is too far. How long is that going to last? That is going to be the main issue for European leaders as they reckon with that in the coming sort of years and months to come. We should also say that they're still incredibly dependent on the United States, so we don't expect them to take a very aggressive line. But I think that the damage that's been done to the transatlantic relationship this week is permanent, and this is the sort of moment for the Europeans to establish what is next and how unified they can be going forward.
It has indeed been a historic week. Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent, thank you for covering it all for us. That is Oliver Crook in Brussels. Let's cross over to Asia now. Winnie Shu's on standby for us in Hong Kong. Winnie, the BOJ keeping rates on hold but raising its inflation outlook. Just walk us through the market reaction and what investors will be watching in the press conference with Governor Ueda.
Yeah, morning, Lizzie. You can see that the yen here is still holding on to its losses after the Bank of Japan decided to keep rates steady. Now, all eyes will be on that presser that is likely going to come in the next 20 minutes or so, and we'll be focusing on how Ueda is going to address that recent bond sell-off and his tone when it comes to the outlook for rates and for inflation. But for now, like you mentioned, it seems to be a bit of a hawkish tilt as he raised that outlook for inflation. And you flip the board and take a look at how that's showing up in the bonds market, because we are seeing on the shorter end bonds getting sold off with the 2-year yield here up about 3 basis points. But in terms of the longer end of the bond, it will be a lot depending on what the fiscal concerns look like. And that is especially important now that Takaichi has dissolved her lower house and has called on for a snap election for February the 8th. And you also flip the board and take a look at the broader Asia market. Overall, still in the green as geopolitical tensions continue to ease, and Korean stocks still driving that momentum here. However, worth highlighting specifically for the Hong Kong exchange stocks, reversing earlier gains and in fact falling after Bloomberg reported that the Chinese regulators are now considering tightening the rules for mainland companies that are considering to sell stocks in Hong Kong. And in terms of the yuan, also want want to highlight the onshore yuan is in fact gaining for 9 weeks by now. And that is coming after the PBOC setting a stronger fixing than the 7 per dollar level. And that is really driving momentum in the Chinese yuan as well. Back to you, Lizzie.
Winnie, thank you so much. That's Winnie Su in Hong Kong. We meanwhile have gold closing in on $5,000 a troy ounce, with geopolitical risks and renewed threats to the Federal Reserve's independence supporting this record-breaking rally. Let's bring in Bloomberg MLive cross-asset strategist Ven Ram now. Good morning, Ven. That Goldman forecast of $5,400 by year-end isn't looking so bullish now. It's only January. Could we get there even faster?
Morning, Lizzie. I think that we will get to probably 5,200 thereabouts, given the momentum and the surge of flows into gold at the moment, because that's just simply incredible. As to whether or not 5,400, it's the year-end target, yes, but we could get there before that, but that doesn't mean we'll keep all those gains between when we get there and the end of the year. So I would think that Goldman Sachs' call is pretty reasonable, actually. And the question, Lizzie, is, this kind of momentum into gold makes me think about the volatility that will accompany gold once it reaches 5,000, 5,200 thereabouts because of the momentum. But, if you look at October, what happened in October, we had a flash crash in gold when it corrected 10% after reaching 4,200 thereabouts. So I think that, if you look at the volatility markets where options traders are active, they are ratcheting up they're bidding up the wall, which means that they are expecting volatility to increase in the coming weeks, and which shouldn't be a surprise because of the huge run-up that gold has had. So the question is, as you said, whether or not gold holds its level, holds its gains after reaching 5,200 or wherever, 5,200 thereabouts.
OK, Ven, thank you so much. That's Bloomberg's Ven Ram. Have a great weekend. Now, still to come on Daybreak Europe, Governor Ueda set to speak after the Bank of Japan held rates steady this morning. We'll bring you the latest lines when the press conference kicks off at 6:30 a.m. London time. But in the meantime, Donald Trump claims that the US can do whatever it wants with Greenland. We'll be speaking to a Danish opposition MP. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
It looks like we have the concept of it. It gets everything we wanted, including especially real national security.
President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
On Arctic sovereignty, we stand firmly with Greenland and Denmark and fully support their unique right to determine Greenland's future.
The process of getting to that agreement has clearly damaged trust amongst allies, long-standing allies with deep friendship and partnership. That's been the very unsettling thing about the last few days.
I think that what's going on is really a change of the world order.
Every country is entitled to defend its legitimate rights and interests.
We consider the people of the United States not just our allies, but our friends.
World leaders in Davos weighing in on the Arctic's security and shifting alliances around the region. The US wants to rewrite its defence agreement with Denmark to remove any limits on its military presence in Greenland, according to people familiar with the matter. Speaking on Air Force One after attending the World Economic Forum, President Trump told reporters that the US would have total access to Greenland.
That was discussed. We can do anything we want. We can do military. We can do anything we want. And it's being negotiated, and let's see what happens. I think it'll be good.
Meanwhile, Greenland's Prime Minister says he's willing to go further in increasing the defence of the Arctic island. Jens Frederik Nielsen has revealed that he would discuss establishing a permanent NATO mission there, but says Greenland's sovereignty is a red line.
We want a respectful and peaceful relationship and a strong partnership as an ally, trusted ally through many, many years. But no doubt, the rhetoric we have heard the last year is unacceptable for us. It is talking about acquiring Greenland and so on. That's, of course, unacceptable.
We're joined now by Sascha Faxe, the MP for the opposition to the Danish coalition government, the Alternative Party. Sascha, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You heard there from President Trump. What stops total access turning into an occupation of Greenland? Does that worry you?
I mean, first of all, we don't acknowledge that there is an agreement, that there hasn't been any negotiations with Greenland. And I mean, it's their country. It belongs to the Greenlanders. And we have heard both the Prime Minister from Greenland and from Denmark saying we haven't been part of this. So when he says total access, nobody knows what he means with it. And nobody knows what is actually part of the so-called agreement. So at this point, we don't acknowledge that that's a part of it. And we still hold that we can have conversations and collaborate with the US. They still have access militarily to Greenland, as they have had since 1951. We are very open for business. The Greenlandic government has said, yes, please come and be part of our businesses to the US. So I mean, so many doors are already open, but total access, I don't know what that would mean.
I mean, even after saying that a framework was reached, President Trump continued to say that US acquisition of Greenland was possible at some stage. Are you convinced that this framework deal is enough to satisfy his obsession with Greenland, even if you're not happy with that deal being reached without Denmark's cooperation?
And it's a very hard question to answer, actually. So it's been going on for a year, back and forth. So there is nothing in this that actually tells us that this is over. And when he have stated very clearly he needs to own it, it's not just once. It's come over and over and over again. It's come even in press releases from the White House, not just in random sentences. It's been a very clear strategy. So if it's a strategy to pressure people, I don't know. That's at least a success because people in Greenland are very stressed. It's impacting their daily lives. But we don't think it's going to ease off here. But the cooling down is appreciated. I mean, we have had the last 24 hours have been like, okay, we're not talking military interventions anymore, tariffs off the table. We are actually feeling that now we can open the door to conversations in the high-level working group that was established last Wednesday and so forth. So we feel that it's going into a different phase, but it's definitely not over.
Well, are you still on alert for military intervention from the US? Has the government been honest with Greenlanders about the risks involved?
So I'm not sure how the risk is evaluated, and I'm not sure how we would actually understand when an intervention is happening. Because the thing is, with the 1951 agreement, the US have very vast possibilities in terms of military. That means that they could, without any problem, come with all of their army, and it won't be considered an intervention, not until they turn around and shoot on the Greenlandic people. So it's not something that is very likely, and we're also seeing NATO standing very close by. So therefore, it's an alertness, but you can't live in that fear all the time. You have to also think about strategies and moving forward, and how can we solve this in a diplomatic manner, and also how can we push on the misinformation and the whole narrative attack that's going on from Trump's side. That's a very large part of the attacks right now, not only economic, but also misinformation, influential campaigns and so forth of what we have seen.
Yeah, you've talked about disinformation also being a weapon by the US in this. But Sascha, now that the tariff threats have at least been dropped against the European allies opposed to Trump's Greenland plans, are you convinced that those allies will have Denmark and Greenland's back, even though they still have to deal with Ukraine?
Yes, I actually do believe that. And I consider it to be part of the same, not the same war as such, but the same interest for Europe is that we want unity in Europe. We want a strengthened Europe. We want to stand closer together and find a way how we can be autonomous in other ways than we haven't been before. And supporting Ukraine is part of that. So we don't live in a constant threat from Russia. And that now also goes for the US. So we need to find a new way forward, not discarding old friendships and so forth with the US, but trust has been broken. So we need to find another path. And so for me, it's actually part of the same thing. Sovereignty is hugely important in the world we're living in because that protects the people, that protects life, that makes life go about. And that goes both for Ukraine and Greenland. So I deeply trust that we stand more united in Europe now than we have done before.
Sascha, really appreciate your time this week. I know it's been a busy one for you. That's Sascha Faxe, MP for the opposition to the Danish coalition government, the Alternative Party. Well, coming up on Daybreak Europe, President Trump says he's settled a candidate to replace Jerome Powell as the next Fed chair. We'll get you the details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now to your top stories from around the world. President Trump says that he's settled on a candidate for the next Federal Reserve chair after completing interviews. Trump's shortlist includes the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, BlackRock executive Rick Rieder, current Fed Governor Christopher Waller, and former Governor Kevin Warsh.
I'll be telling you soon. Now, I have somebody that I think will be very good, but I'm not going to reveal it yet. Somebody that's very respected, very well known, and will do, I think, a very good job.
The president's also said that his new Board of Peace is withdrawing Canada's invitation to join. This comes just days after Prime Minister Mark Carney issued a warning against coercive tactics by the world's great powers in a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Following his stark warning, Carney returned to Canada with a message aimed at defining his country's role in a fracturing global order.
Now, Canada can't solve all the world's problems, but we can show that another way is possible. That the arc of history isn't destined to be warped towards authoritarianism and exclusion. It can still bend towards progress and justice.
Meanwhile, President Trump threw cold water on a policy his administration was developing to allow savers in 401k retirement plans to use some of that money for down payments on homes. The proposal had been a key part of efforts to address voters' affordability concerns. Trump told reporters that he's not a, quote, huge fan of putting down a deposit, suggesting the plan is being shelved despite top White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett indicating that the plan would be unveiled soon. And vampire horror film Sinners has broken the record for the most Oscar nominations. The film about twin brothers fighting vampires in segregated Mississippi in the 1930s surpassed the previous record of 14 set by All About Eve, Titanic and La La Land. The Oscars will be held on March the 15th in Los Angeles. Well, those are your top stories. Coming up on Daybreak Europe, Governor Uwade's due to speak in the next few minutes following the BOJ's move to keep rates steady and raise its inflation outlook. I'll be joined by Lale, Akoner, global market analyst at eToro, to break down Uwade's commentary and that rate decision. So that conversation coming up next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning from London. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Emerging market stocks power to a record as investors rotate out of US assets. The yen weakens after the Bank of Japan holds rates steady, with Governor Ueda set to speak shortly. Pressure for progress. The US, Ukraine and Russia meet in the UAE today in a renewed push to end Putin's war, a day after President Zelensky lambasted European inaction. Plus, back on track, the EU moves to revive ratification of its trade agreement with the US after tensions thaw over Greenland. A very good morning. It's 6:30 a.m. here in London. Happy Friday. We have made it, and what a week it has been in terms of the geopolitics dominating conversations over in Davos. This is the picture in markets this morning. So futures pointing higher on Wall Street after the session was higher yesterday. We had a rally in tech, strong US economic data. The weaker dollar, though, helping to spur gold towards that $5,000 an ounce level. We're now at $4,955, up 0.4%. Of course, the geopolitical risks haven't gone away, but it's not just about that. And our next guest is going to talk about that as well. But we keep an eye on the yen here, 158 per dollar, so weaker at the moment off the back of that BOJ press conference, holding, as I say, just one dissenter for a hike at this point, but they have increased the inflation forecast. So we await to hear from Governor Ueda in the next few minutes. On the front pages of the newspapers this morning, the Financial Times has President Trump suing JPMorgan and its CEO Jamie Dimon for $5 billion over claims that the lender stopped offering him and his businesses banking services for political reasons. The complaint saying that the bank was motivated by its woke beliefs, their words, not mine, and JPMorgan saying that the suit has no merit. We actually have a fantastic big take on Wall Street chiefs laying low in Davos to avoid Trump's trolling. So I recommend a read of that. But flip over and we can show you the Wall Street Journal. They've got TikTok and its Chinese parent ByteDance sealing a deal to operate in the US after this years-long geopolitical and regulatory tug of war. And then if we flip over again here in the UK, we've got The Guardian reporting that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his allies have launched a Stop Andy Burnham campaign. So this is the Labour Mayor of Manchester, of course. Only this week he doubled down on his view that the UK's in hock to the bond market, and this amid signs that a pathway to a potential leadership challenge is coming into view for Burnham by an expected by-election in the north of England. So we saw yesterday Gilts unnerved by that and taking a hit in the session. So this is Starmer's allies launching this campaign. But you can get a roundup of all these stories and everything you need to know to get your day going by looking at today's edition of Daybreak, which, as ever, terminal subscribers can find by going to DAYB Go. Now, the governor of the Bank of Japan, Kazuo Ueda, has taken to the podium. He's speaking in a press conference following the Bank of Japan rate decision earlier on. Of course, just to recap, they held rates steady at 0.75% as expected, only one dissenter. Of course, the Bank of Japan only a month ago took rates to their highest in 3 decades. They revised up 4 out of 6 of their inflation forecasts, reiterating their stance of raising rates if the economic outlook is achieved. And so investors really will be glued to this press conference for clues as to whether the next hike is coming sooner than the market expects. But a difficult balancing act here for Ueda. Too dovish and the yen could tank, too hawkish and he risks political backlash with the elections coming next month. We also listen in for any commentary on the recent bond market upheaval. Well, let's bring in an expert with views on this and the markets across the world. We have Lale Akoner, global market analyst at eToro, with me in the studio. Good morning, Lale.
Good morning,
Happy
Lizzie.
Friday to you.
Thank you so much.
We've got an eye here on Ueda. As we wait for lines from him, what would count to you as a hawkish signal?
Sure. Well, look, I mean, any indication that they will be obviously hiking rates in the next few months is important for us. They have very much constrained fiscal space, and therefore we see that steepening bias in the curve. That is obviously very highly correlated with rest of the world, especially in the United States. And we're going to take a look at, again, what's the pace of the increase in the long end of the curve. If the pace increases, that could obviously bring some capital back home and therefore put some pressure in global equity markets as well. So overall, again, that hawkish bias, how many rate hikes we can expect. And again, the inflation forecast is obviously quite important.
Yeah, and perhaps any signals when it comes to the BOJ getting involved in bond buying?
Definitely, that is also very important. But as important is, again, the government obviously said that they are looking to do tax cuts. How are they going to fund that? It has big implications for the fiscal policy and therefore the JGB curve as well.
It's also been, of course, a massive week for geopolitics, as I say, dominating the agenda at Davos. I was interested in your notes. You say that the rush to gold isn't just a flight to safety amidst the geopolitics. It's replacing long-end treasuries as a hedge to equities. What's the difference, ultimately, if it's all about getting away and finding some place to protect yourself from US policy risk?
Sure, well, two things. First of all, obviously, the balanced funds are getting less relevant at the moment as, again, the long-dated treasuries post-2022, I would argue, and that accelerated post-Liberation Day, they have less of a hedging position in portfolios because they are positively correlated to equities. So investors are, and retail investors, Lizzie, are really looking to add gold instead of long-dated treasuries in their portfolios when they want to hedge U.S. equities, right? So that's important. And we're saying that actually retail investors are going to be more important in gold price movements going forward.
OK. Do you think that Goldman's call of 5,400 by the end of the year is too bullish? Or should we put that as next month or the month after's call?
That's a great question. We don't have a target, but I do not think that is too bullish. Obviously, more and more central banks are diversifying away from the US dollar. That is because obviously they have seen the Russian invasion and what it would mean for sanctions and everything for them as well. So any central bank buying obviously puts a floor on gold, and therefore it's become more consistent in terms of, elevating to higher levels. So I don't think it's bullish at all.
I mean, a lot of people sit in that chair and use the word diversifying and talk about diversification, including especially in the need for equity diversification. Sure. Is that just code for sell America?
No, I don't think so. I think still America has an amazing index comprised of very high quality stocks. I think the case for investing in America still stays. That said, obviously, the fact that the US dollar is quite weak does bring opportunities in Europe, and especially this year we're seeing EM Asia as well. Very high quality tech stocks there in Asia too that we can diversify into. So I would say that, don't sell America, maybe bring exposures a little bit to market weights. But again, diversifying by going elsewhere.
You mentioned retail investors. We've seen the S&P, of course, breaking free of the grip of the leadership of the Mag 7. I wonder how much the fact that small caps are leading indicates to you that the incremental buyer has been US retail.
Sure. Well, again, one of the interesting things about this year is there will be massive amount of both fiscal and monetary policies coming into the market. That means that obviously small caps are going to go higher from here. We really like high quality small caps. So think about S&P 600 rather than just Russell 2000, right? So it still has room to run, and especially small caps accelerate from here when we're further into the rate cutting cycle, which we are. And therefore, I do expect more gains from this point.
And does it not concern you what will happen to the US economy after this year? Of course, we've got the midterms. It's the year of the sugar rush. What about after the sugar rush?
That's a great point. I am concerned about higher inflationary pressures, not for this year, but next year and maybe after that as well. Reason being, again, that we have around 650 billion of monetary plus fiscal policy coming into the market, plus we have deregulation going on as well, and QT is ended. So all of that would mean that it could increase inflationary pressures as well.
And while we are in the thick of the sugar rush, what sectors do you buy?
I like financials. I do like banks especially. I'm staying away from insurance. I like home builders. It's very important that Fannie and Freddie are going to buy 200 billion of mortgage-backed securities. Again, if deregulation comes through, banks will hold more mortgage-backed securities and treasuries as well. All that would mean is that the spread between mortgage-backed securities and treasuries are going to tighten, which is good for mortgage rates, right, and therefore the home builders. So I want to go with banks, regional banks. We like home builders.
I've got one eye, on the press conference from Governor Ueda in Tokyo. He's been saying, Lale, that conditions remain accommodative after this December hike, that lending rates linked to the Bank of Japan lending rates are already rising, that they'll keep raising rates if the economic outlook is realised. They've said that before, haven't they? And that the pace of rate hikes is going to depend on economic conditions. Anything there to excite you?
Yeah, a cautious stance, I would say. I think they're taking into account the fact that yields have gone higher, and that would mean a tightening in financial conditions. So I do believe that cautious stance is coming from that.
Yeah, so the yen just weakening a touch as we listen to these remarks from Governor Ueda, still at 158 per dollar. Just finally, in terms of another central bank, are we too focused on Fed cuts, perhaps because of all the political pressure and the drama around who replaces Chair Powell, when actually it's the combination of rate cuts and balance sheet expansion that's going to keep fueling risk assets?
Sure. I mean, exactly. I mean, for this year, we're saying that it's not only going to be about rate cuts, it's about balance sheets as well. As we know, the Fed is rolling off their mortgage-backed securities. Whether they're going to invest in T-bills is a question, and the Fed governor and the ECB is obviously, our base case is that they're not going to cut rates any further, but inflation is coming down. So there could be a surprise from there as well.
OK, we'll keep an eye on those PMIs later on today. Lale, always a pleasure to have you with us in the studio. That's Lale Akoner, Global Market Analyst at eToro. Well, coming up on the programme, Ericsson shares indicated higher this morning on TradeGate after reporting strong results and proposing a share buyback. We're going to be joined by the company's CEO next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Well, Ericsson's earnings have beaten analyst forecasts in the fourth quarter as the Swedish telecoms equipment makers' efforts to cut costs and boost margins in a sluggish market have paid off. We can speak now, I'm pleased to say, to Ericsson's CEO, Börje Ekholm, who joins us now from Stockholm. Morning. Good to have you with us on the programme. Thank you for making time. I'm looking at these results. The market, though, has been difficult. What's worked for you this quarter, and what are the challenges, the biggest challenges in the next quarter? Börje, good morning.
Good morning, Lizzie. It's great to be with you, and thanks for having me. Yeah, the reality is it's been a difficult market, but we have focused on being disciplined in our execution. We focused on operating efficiently. But we've also made selective investments in growth areas over the past couple of years, and we're starting to see that they are coming through now. 5G core, mission-critical networks, but also enterprises. So as we put the year together, or put the fourth quarter together, we saw an organic growth of 6%, good margins, 48% gross margin, 18% EBITDA margins. So overall, I would say we had a strong ending of the year.
And your rival, Nokia, is leaning into the role that it can play when it comes to the AI data center boom. It's taken money from NVIDIA. I'm really interested what your strategy is there.
We think AI is of course, it's maybe the most fundamental technology we have seen as a mankind. So it will have a major impact on the way we work, the way we operate, the way we interact with companies as consumers. So this is a big trend that will be with us for a long time. But what we see also is that the next step on AI, first step was really focused on building the data centers, the semiconductors, etc. All that is going to be critical. But I think the next step is going to be even more exciting. That's when we move AI into applications, devices. So think about them as drones, XR glasses. We will see a large number of new use cases where AI has actually moved into, call it physical AI, and actually starting to be used. Here, connectivity is critical. So I view AI and connectivity as actually the fabric of the future. So our strategy is focused on being the best AI-enabled network that actually can solve the AI applications and devices for the future.
But your approach has been somewhat different, hasn't it? You've been selling business units, you've announced job cuts. Are you done with divestments, or is your portfolio where you want it to be?
I think overall the portfolio is where we wanted it to be. We have the mix of assets that we think is the right for the future. But we will, of course, make some small tuck-in acquisitions. We'll do some other divestitures to set the portfolio right. But they will be in smaller character. But our focus is to be, providing the programmable, autonomous, AI-native networks of the future that the AI applications will need. And we're really excited about that. We're starting to see a positive trend here happening where, and if you look at, when we talk about where China is, it has a strong connectivity network, and they are developing AI application at speed right now. So I'm very optimistic about the next step of AI rollout.
Well, yeah, in Davos, you called Europe's push for tech sovereignty dangerous, even though the restrictions on Chinese technology, competitors like Huawei, you would think would be to Ericsson's benefit. I'm interested why you would push back against a policy that appears to benefit your business.
No, it's the discussion about sovereignty is more the discussion on European sovereignty, where many seem to think you can create a sovereign digital stack in Europe, and I caution against that. I think we are dependent on American technology. American technology companies are front runners in semiconductors, in data centers, etc. So we need to work in that. And if Europe will succeed for the future, we need to have the best technology, and then we need to align and work with the American ecosystem. That's quite clear. So I see the strive to build a homegrown solution that's inferior to the best technology, basically not going to work. And I think that's what I caution against. We have been very clear that we believe we need to have trusted, secure and resilient digital infrastructure in Europe, and we want to be part of that. So I believe the discussion about high-risk vendors, for example, that you see coming out of the Commission now, is a very important step for Europe. But let's not think that we can be independent from American technology. We need to work together with the US tech companies.
And just finally, beyond those 1,600 job cuts that you've already announced in Sweden, are there any more planned in other regions?
We actually have, over the past year, we have actually reduced about 5,000 globally. I've said before, I think that's about the pace we'll be at. We'll have continuous efficiency gains, improvements in the way we operate, and we need to do that. So we'll continue to make continuous improvements in the business.
Okay. Börje, thank you so much for making time for us this morning. That's Börje Ekholm, the Ericsson CEO, who I'm sure has a spring in his step with the shares indicated higher on Tradegate off the back of those results. Well, now to some other top corporate news this morning. The armoured vehicle and munitions maker Czechoslovak Group is set to start trading in Amsterdam this morning after the firm and its owner raised €3.3 billion in its IPO. The first-time share sale, which values the Prague-based company at €25 billion, is the world's biggest ever IPO for a pure-play defence firm. Elsewhere, President Trump is suing JPMorgan and its chief executive, Jamie Dimon, for at least $5 billion over allegations that the lender stopped offering him and his businesses banking services for political reasons. JPMorgan says it doesn't close accounts for political or religious reasons. Meanwhile, JPMorgan has raised Jamie Dimon's 2025 pay by 10.3% to $43 million. Dimon runs the biggest US bank, which notched its 8th consecutive year of record revenue and is also one of the longest tenured CEOs atop Wall Street. Elsewhere, Intel shares have plunged in late trading after the CEO, Lip Bhutan, issued a weak forecast and flagged ongoing manufacturing problems. The company has projected first quarter revenue of $11.7 billion to $12.7 billion. Intel has said that low manufacturing yields and depleted inventory are limiting supply, with more server chips not expected until the end of the quarter. And President Trump has thanked Chinese President Xi Jinping for working with the US in approving the TikTok deal. TikTok and its Chinese parent ByteDance have closed a long-awaited agreement to transfer parts of its US operations to American investors. The social media company has officially established a US entity with 3 managing investors: Oracle, Silver Lake and the Abu Dhabi-based firm MGX. Well, just recapping what we've been seeing out of Tokyo, of course, we've been keeping an eye on Governor Ueda's press conference for you. He says that they may conduct operations to encourage stable yield formation. This, of course, after the sell-off that we saw at the long end of the Japanese bond curve this week. We were looking for clues as to whether the BOJ would be willing to tip a toe into this market again and get involved to help with financial stability. We've seen the yen weakening against the dollar ever since the decision itself, and currently we are at 158 per dollar, so even weaker now as we've been listening to Ueda. He says that they'll be keeping a close eye, watching FX closely. Well, plenty more coming up right here. We'll dive into the Japanese story next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. In our last few minutes together, I just want to recap what we've had from the Bank of Japan this morning and put some meat on the bones. We've had the press conference from Governor Ueda saying that they will be cooperating with the government over conducting nimble bond operations. Of course, we saw the sell-off earlier this week at the long end of the Japanese curve off the back of the fiscal plans of Prime Minister Takaichi. Here is why global investors care so much about this bond market. You can see here that the Bank of Japan is the dominant buyer of government bonds, but for a very long time, of course, the Japanese bond market was the anchor really on the global debt market because of the low yields that you saw on JGBs. No more, thanks to the BOJ scaling back bond purchases. And if we flip over the board, we know that we also have the possibility of more bond sales to fund Prime Minister Takaichi's tax cuts. Together, that has resulted in this uncharacteristic volatility. So you can see here that the yield curve in Japan has been much steeper than its peers. White line Japan, you have the UK, Germany and the US below that. But flip the board one more time, and there are signs after this week that the BOJ and the government are uneasing about the bond market volatility. We heard from the finance minister that helped to pull bond yields off their highs. We are checking in on the yen just before we go. It has been weaker against the dollar ever since that decision to hold rates, down 0.3%. They'll be covering it on the opening trade next. This is Bloomberg.